That's Enough Out of You, a weekly podcast where you'll hear the truth, or at least a closer version of the truth than most of the bullshit that's out there. Here are your hosts, Bill Rader and Sean Kane.
Hello, and welcome to That's Enough Out of You. I'm your host, Bill Rader.
I'm Sean Kane.
And this is a weekly podcast where we talk about a bunch of different topics. We talk about all kinds of different stuff. We talk about sports and history. We talk about sports history. We talk about movies and pop culture and historical figures and events. We talk about all kinds of stuff.
We talk about whatever we want because it's our show, Billy.
And it's really going really well. We've had some great guests over the last couple months. We had, our first guest was Jenna from the Garlic Jar podcast. She was great. We had Lisa Pease, of course. That was a great two-parter. And a couple weeks ago, we had Alex Robinson from Star Wars Minute and Godfather Minute. And I want to give our listeners, Sean, a little look behind the curtain here.
Okay.
So when we recorded our episode with Alex, it was really great to have him on. He gave up his time and came on with us, spent about an hour with us, which was really great. And we started the episode and we got about 10 minutes in and I realized I never hit the record button, which kind of important when you're doing.
Yeah, it's a little important, buddy.
Kind of important. So I literally had to stop Alex mid-sentence and apologize, and he was really cool about it. Alex,
he really was.
I'm sure it's happened to him a million times. He's done millions of podcasts, so I'm sure it's happened before to him, and he just kind of took it in stride, and it was really cool. But yeah, things are going good. We've got listeners. I was looking at the stats the other day, Sean. We've got listeners all over the world. We have
it's incredible, buddy.
It's amazing how the reach of, it's the internet, but just our tiny little podcast here where we've got listeners in the UK, we've got a lot of listeners in Ireland. I know, Sean, you got tons of feedback from friends in Ireland listening. We've got there's listeners in Canada, the Netherlands, Africa, Italy. Just amazing that it's
France, Sweden. It's incredible, Billy. It really is. And all over the United States, not just locally here in Northeast Pennsylvania.
Yeah. And hopefully we'll keep growing, keep getting more and more listeners. But pretty exciting and it's definitely encouraging for us. It's even if we kind of keep going in the way that we are, I'll be happy. Like I said, when we started this, I would have been happy if we just had a few listeners who were interested in what we were doing, but it seems like we're growing pretty well. So
yeah, we're doing pretty good for two rookies, buddy.
I think so. So Sean, how's it going? How you doing?
Good, buddy. Good. And I'm ready for tonight, buddy. I figured, I already got the New York Jet fans mad at me. I got the CIA's not too happy with me. So I think tonight I'll get the British government aggravated with me. Why not?
You got vans parked outside your house?
Yeah, you want to start my car for me, buddy?
No, thanks. So you're gonna get the British government mad at you. Why? So talk about our topic because that's what we're doing today.
Tonight, Billy, we're going to talk about the troubles in Northern Ireland, and then we're going to get into a little bit of Whitey Bulger and the Boston Irish mob and their involvement with the IRA. But we're gonna talk about this subject more in the troubles, like in more detail down the road when we got some guests I'm trying to line up. So tonight we're just going to give a little overview, and I want to be real careful about what I say and what the tricky area here, because this is a situation I've always been interested in. My dad has always been interested in, and I've met political figures from the Sinn Féin, Jerry Adams, Martin McGuinness, Joe Cahill, when they came over here. I've been to Ireland. I'm plugged into Boston over there. I've been to Boston a million times. So I want to be specific. When I talk, I'm going to give an overview of the situation And then when we get into the Boston stuff, I'm going to be taking the information from two specific sources, which is going to be Patrick Nee, who wrote a book, A Criminal and an Irishman, and TJ English, who's one of the best, historians and authors on organized crime. He wrote a book, Paddywhacked, on the Irish mob, and he wrote a book on the Westies, and he wrote a book, Where the Bodies Are Buried, on Whitey Bulger. So it's going to be those two specific sources that I'm going to be getting the information later on in the show,
Okay.
So we're just going to get, we're going to do a little bit, get into the situation there and talk about it a little bit. And if I get a little bit angry, Bill, you could, calm me down, buddy.
I'll do my best, Sean. All right, well, let's get into it then.
Well, let's talk about it, Bill. So the problem in Northern Ireland is, and I'm going to be specific on this, is 100% the British government's fault. I mean, it's England's colonialism that's caused this problem. I mean, I'm sitting here trying to figure out who caused more problems in the world, the English government or Alan Dulles, because everywhere they go with colonialism and imperialism, they cause problems. And anytime you take away somebody's freedom and they fight back, and then you're appalled by that, I mean, what do you expect? And it's just like, 800 years of the English trying to colonize Ireland has caused this problem. So what you have you had all of Ireland at one time was colonized, just like America was colonized, and the thing is, the 26 counties are free now, but you still have 6 counties in Northern Ireland that are under British rule. And you have the community split between, the Irish Catholics and the British Protestants. But when you really look at it, Bill, and this happens every time with colonialism, like when all of Ireland was colonized, you had a lot of, people from England and Scotland and Wales, they were important into Ireland. So when you look at the British Protestants, they trace their heritage really back to England and Scotland and Wales. So they don't consider themselves Irish. And this happens all the time, but you see this, with Palestine and Israel. And that's a problem that the British caused, if we want to be technical about it, because before Israel was a state in 1948, Britain tried to colonize that land. And then what happens? You have the community split between the Palestinians and the Jewish people, right? So, and Britain has colonized parts of Africa. I mean,
Right.
And then every time somebody fights back, they call him a terrorist. Well, don't forget, Bill, they called Sam Adams a terrorist. I mean, the British called him a thug and a murderer and a criminal.
Right.
And the thing is, it's always going to be.
Now he makes delicious beer.
Well, he does. I didn't want to mention that, but that's my favorite American beer. But yeah, but I mean, seriously though, Bill, it's like, colonialism causes so many problems and it splits the communities. And now you have, the community in Northern Ireland is split, and it's 100% because of British colonialism, and you can trace that back to England trying to colonize the world. You understand what I'm saying?
Right. And I mean, the religious differences have quite a bit to do with it as well, but
well, sure, Bill, but I think when you're talking about, the Catholics and the Protestants and stuff, you really, when you get to the heart of the problem, it's two communities. The one feels that, they're Irish, and the other feels they're British.
Right.
And you have these communities split. And now I guarantee, Bill, if you took a vote today and it was a fair vote, the population, I think the Catholics would outnumber the Protestants. And to me, the only solution I want to hear is a united Ireland. The 6 counties should be under the rule of Ireland. It should be 32 counties, all under Irish rule. And, Britain's created this problem. So fix the problem and then get out. That's the way I feel about it. And I'm not, I'm just going to anger some people tonight. And, there might be people listening that disagree with me. But again, Bill, you forget, Britain colonized America, and you look to Africa, you look everywhere they've gone, they've caused problems. And the same thing with Alan Dulles. I mean, who's caused more problems in the world? Britain or Alan Dulles? I mean, it's pretty close, buddy.
Well, so, I mean, what do you think then, Sean, if you're saying Britain needs to fix the problem and get out of there, what do they need to do to fix it?
Well, Bill, I mean, to me, the only solution is that, and again, this is really, again, technical. We'll have guests on to discuss this more, but again, you should have a united Ireland, one Ireland, 32 counties, And then the British Protestants that are in the 6 counties in the north, they got to conform to that. And if they don't, then you know what? They could go to England, and then they could wave the Union Jack in England, and they could be English like they want to be. And Britain should fix this issue. The British government caused this problem, and it's unbelievable that the media is always twisted. They never tell you. They always make the Irish look like the bad guys in this scenario, and that's what really angers me, because I'm half Irish, half Polish. I've been over there to Ireland. I see what happens, but Bill, the problem is when this is another issue with colonialism, and when you have the community split. And when you have the two communities, the Irish Catholics and the British Protestants, and you have one community that is getting all the jobs, one community that the British government is colluding with the Protestant paramilitaries that were fighting the IRA, and that's a proven fact. And this is when you have one side that's getting all the rights, and basically another side that's getting all the rights taken. It's the same thing with Palestine and Israel, right? You can't have so many things, steer toward one part of the community. The other part of the community is getting the rights taken from them. You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened. That's what's happened in the 6 counties.
So, Sean, you mentioned the IRA. There's probably a lot of listeners who have heard it or have never heard of the IRA before. Explain to those folks what the IRA is.
Well, it's the Irish Republican Army, and they're fighting. They were fighting for British rule, and now you have peace process over there. But I mean, when you had the IRA and you had the political wing of the IRA, which was Sinn Féin, which I mentioned earlier. One of their former leaders, Gerry Adams, he came to Scranton. I heard him speak, and Martin McGuinness was another leader. Joe Cahill, and they were fighting. They wanted a united Ireland, and this goes back to. It really goes back 800 years. You could go back to England trying to colonize Ireland. We're going to get into more detail, Bill, when we have a guest. We have guests down the road lined up.
Mm-hmm.
But for now, what I want to talk about is the involvement of the Boston underworld and their involvement with the IRA. Because I think Hollywood is another one, Bill, that just the way they portray, the IRA to me is frustrating. The way they're always portrayed as the bad guys, and they're not portrayed like they're fighting a war, and that's what they were doing. And this goes to, we're going to get into, let's go to 1981. Okay, so what happened, Bill, is the situation in Ireland was really getting intense over there. So previous 5 years, the British government has taken 250 suspected IRA men into custody. Okay. And they were incarcerated in the infamous Lancash prison, which is right outside of Belfast. And it was also known as the Maze. And all the alleged IRA men, they were locked up in what's called the infamous H blocks. Okay. And they were denied special category status as political prisoners by the British government, and they wore nothing but blankets and bed sheets, and because they simply refused to wear, prison uniforms, because in their mind, they weren't criminals. They were political prisoners fighting a war. So in 1981, March 1st, Bobby Sands began his hunger strike. Okay. And this is where it gets so intense over there. These young guys that were prisoners, they wanted political status, and the British government under Margaret Thatcher at the time was the prime minister. She refused to give them political status. And this is where, to me, Bobby Sands is always going to be a hero, and he's always going to be a political genius, because he understood, Bill, the narrative from the media and the way the British government were portraying the IRA, that they were always going to be considered, in a negative light. And they're always going to be bloodthirsty killers. And what he wanted to do was change that narrative, so he went on this hunger strike. And this is where Margaret Thatcher, Bill, really gets the anger of the Irish, because she refused to give in. and she refused to allow these men political status as a political criminal or political prisoners. You understand what I'm saying?
Right. Okay.
So what happens is, she actually says this quote, Bill. She said that there's no such thing as a political statue. There's no such thing as political murder, political bombings, political violence. There's only criminal violence, which to me is pretty ironic that someone with all the blood on her hands and the blood of the British government has caused problems all over the world with colonialism should make a comment like that.
Right.
So anyway, Bill, what happens is a lot of people were angered by this. And this is where, we don't try to get too political on this show as far as US politics when it comes to, we're not going to get into picking sides and getting into this, but this is where I'm going to give a big hit to Ronald Reagan on this, because he was president of the United States at the time. And, Mr. Notre Dame fighting Irishman and win one for the Gipper. And he's so proud of his Irish heritage. Well, he had Margaret Thatcher's ear at the time, and what did he do, Bill? He did nothing. He did nothing but kiss up to Thatcher. And the two of them allowed all these boys to die, And the thing is, to me, that I'm always going to look down on Ronald Reagan as a human being because of, what he did there. He had the power of the presidency. And let's face it, Bill, the British would be speaking German if it wasn't for America.
Right.
So he could have stepped in and he could have did something, and he chose to do nothing. Chose to do nothing but back Margaret Thatcher completely. And all these kids died. And this angered a lot of people, a lot of Irish Americans and people of Irish heritage all through the world. So let's get into Boston, Bill. So this really angered the Boston Irish community, which is pretty, intense up there. You know that. Ireland, a lot of immigrants from Ireland, they go really, when they come to the United States, there's two places they go really. Boston and New York is the main places. And because New York is much bigger than Boston, it's just more prevalent and it's more pronounced in Boston, the Irish population. So there was a relationship between, the Irish American community and the trying to get a united Ireland. And this is where the underworld in Boston comes into play. So now everything I'm going to say from this point on is basically going to be taken from two sources, which is Patrick Nee, who was a high-ranking lieutenant in the Winter Hill Gang, which is the Irish mob in Boston, and TJ English that I talked about earlier. So before I get into that, Bill, is there any questions?
So the IRA is not sanctioned by Ireland. I mean, they're not.
Bill, Ireland, you got to look at it like this. Ireland, the 26 counties, which is the Republic of Ireland, is free of British rule, technically. So that's separate from the 6 counties are under British rule.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a great mural in Boston, Bill, and you've probably seen, I had a picture, I put it on social media before, that they have it shows the map of Ireland, and it shows the 6 counties, and it shows the British Union Jack in the 6 counties. And on the wall, it says, Ireland unfree will never be at peace. And right. it was by a store owner that was from Belfast, and he moved to Boston. He was living in Boston, and that mural's there. I believe it's still there. So no, it's just, there's separate. Ireland is split into, divided into 2, and its 6 counties are occupied by British rule, and that's the problem, Bill.
Okay.
So when we get into Boston, so when you look at organized crime in America, we talked about this a lot, Bill. You talk about the Italian Cosa Nostra and the 26 families controlled, basically organized crime in the United States. And then we talked about how the Irish gangster and the Jewish gangster work within that alignment. Well, in Boston, in Massachusetts area, the greater Boston area, you basically, going back to the 60s, you had 3 Irish gangs that controlled the area, okay? And you had the Italian mafia, their presence in New England was the Patriarca family, which is based out of Providence, Rhode Island, okay? And they didn't have a power base in Boston. They had crews in Boston, and then later they would have the underboss Aunt Julo would be based in the north end of Boston. But their power base was always Rhode Island. So what you had is you had these three Irish clans. You had the Winter Hill Gang, which was always the biggest gang that was based in Somerville, Mass. You had the Killeen Gang, which was moneymakers. They were very powerful. They're bookmakers, loan sharks. They make a lot of money. They were based in Southie, the famous Irish neighborhood in Boston. And you had the Mullen Gang, which was a group of guys that were, a lot of them were either Irish born or they were Vietnam vets, and they were tough guys, but they weren't money makers, Bill. They were more of like, thieves and doing some side jobs and nothing, they weren't money makers compared to the Killians.
Mm-hmm.
And when one of their top members was Patrick Nee, that I discussed earlier. And what you had in the 60s, Bill, is you had the Winter Hill Gang started the Irish gang wars, okay? And you had a group from Charlestown fighting with the group from Somerville. And what happened was the Patriarcha families sided with Winter Hill, and they were headed at the time by a guy by the name of Buddy McLean. And he gets taken out, and Howie Winter takes over Winter Hill. Now, Howie Winter was an old school gangster, Bill, and he was one of these guys who take care of the community. And he didn't want, he portray himself like a legitimate businessman, and he was a smart, cagey guy. And with the help of Patriarcha, he took over really all of Boston organized crime, the biggest Irish gang in Boston. But you still had the Killians and the Mullins, okay? Now, this whole time period during the Irish gang wars, Whitey Bulger was in prison. Now, a lot of people try to make it out that he was involved in this first Irish gang war, and that's not true. He was in Alcatraz, charged with bank robbery. And the interesting thing, he got an early parole, Bill, because he became part of the CIA's MK Ultra program. He didn't know it at the time what it was, but they were testing LSD and the effects of LSD on prisoners. And by signing up for that program, and with the help of his brother, who was the state Senate president and a very powerful politician in Massachusetts, he got an early release. So when he comes out, he joins the Killeen Gang, okay? Now, the Killeen Gang, they were, like I said, they were making a lot of money. And they get into with the Mullen Gang because they're both in Southie, and, they get into this big gang war. And what happens is the Winter Hill's kind of sitting back, and the Italian mafia in Rhode Island, they're kind of sitting back, letting it play out. But the violence is getting really bad. And the Killians had Bulgers in the Killeen Gang, but he wasn't the most infamous member of that gang. It was a guy by the name of Billy O'Sullivan. And he was the most ruthless, feared guy in Boston, Bill, okay? Mm-hmm. And everybody figured that when this war started, that the Killians were going to take him out. They had more guys, they had more money. And the Mullins, like I said, they were really like, a lot of Vietnam vets. They were trained really well, and they took the war to the Killians. And what happens is they end up taking out Billy O. They kill him, and that sends shockwaves through the underworld because nobody expected that to happen. So Whitey Bulger and the rest of the Killians kind of go on the run, and this is where the evil genius of Whitey Bulger comes into play, because when he was in prison, Bill, he was plotting his takeover of the Boston underworld. So he's on the losing side of this. Pat Nee and the Mullen Gang have him on the run, okay? And what he does is he approaches Howie Winter at the Winter Hill Gang, and he says, listen, I could end this gang violence because nobody's making money with all this violence on the street. And you know that, Bill, following all this organized crime. If right. Guys are killing each other, they're not making money. They're not earning. Yep.
Right.
So he says, I'll end this war. I'll get rid of the rest of the Killians in the management and end the war. But I want Southie. I want all the Mullen guys to work for me. I take over Southie. I'll work under your flag, under Winter Hill. And, that's that. And that'll end, it'll be peace, and there'll be, everybody go back to earning money. Now, Howie Winter's a smart guy, though. He understands that the Mullins would be more loyal to him, and he gets along with them guys. He likes all them guys. But again, this is where we talked about a gangster's a gangster. And what does a gangster care about more than anything else in the world? Making money.
Yep.
That's it. So he knows, even though Bulger would turn on him in a second and take him out if the opportunity presented itself, he knows that. He knows he can't trust them. He knows he'd be better off trusting the Mullen guys, but he also knows he's going to make a ton more money with Whitey Bulger. So what does he do? He sides with Bulger, and they have a sit down, and the patriarchal family is represented by a couple by the name of J.R. Russo, and they sit down with the Mullins and they say, this is the situation. You guys are all going to be under the flag of Winter Hill, but Whitey runs Southie. And that's how he told them. Whitey runs Southie, but he works for me, and you guys work for him. Now the Mullins, especially Pat and E, are sitting there like, my God, we're winning this war, and we got Whitey on the run, and now all of a sudden we're working for him, but he flipped the tables.
Right.
And then what happens is Whitey Bulger makes, we talked about this, an alignment with the FBI, especially an agent by the name of John Conley. And what happens is the law enforcement was hot on the trail of Winter Hill because they were really making a ton of money, Bill. They were involved in bookmaking, loan sharking. And one of the big things they had going was horse race scams. They were fixing horse races up and down the East Coast, all the way from New England down to Florida. And the government had about 50 members of Winter Hill. They had them nailed. A several-year investigation, including upper management, like the top 20 guys were all going down, including Whitey Bulger and his right hand, Stephen the Rifleman Fleming. And what happens is John Conley, the FBI guy, goes to Jeremiah O'Sullivan, who was the district attorney, U.S. attorney, and he was also a friend and a political ally of Whitey's brother Billy, who was the state Senate president. And he tells him, look, these guys are working for us. They're key informants. You need to take their name off this indictment. So Sullivan agrees to it. And he takes Whitey Bulger's name and Stephen the Rifleman Fleming's name off the indictment. And everybody else goes down, the top people. So Whitey and Stevie go into that void and they take over Winter Hill. So now they're in charge, and they're the most powerful gangsters in Boston. And they're, and Whitey always had a friendship and an alliance with old man Patriarcha, who's running the Cosa Nostra family in Rhode Island. So now we're at 1981, when we're back to the hunger strikers in Ireland are everything's going down there, and it's intense. And a lot of people, Irish Americans in Boston, are furious about this, including some guys in the underworld, the Boston underworld. And one of them is Patrick Nee. Patrick Nee was actually born in Galway, Ireland, and he felt, that it was his duty to help out the fight for freedom over there. And another was a guy in Charlestown, Joe Murray, who was a smuggler, and he was smuggling guns and drugs and everything. And he was under the flag of Winter Hill. Now, this is completely from Pat Nee. Everything, you can read his book, The Criminal and the Irishman. All this information is coming from him. This is him saying this, him and Murray and guys like that. He felt, he considered themselves revolutionaries. They're helping the cause. And he felt that, Whitey Bulger was in the cause. His heart wasn't in the cause. He's just in it for the money. And you remember the movie Black Mass, Bill, about Whitey Bulger, and
right.
Remember the scene where they talked about in the movie, they have Whitey meeting with Joe Cahill, and they have Whitey, I think after his son died, I think they said that, he never smiled after that. And the only thing that made him smile was helping the IRA. Remember that part in the movie?
Yeah.
So according to Nee, though, that's not true. That Whitey was just in it for the money. And my personal belief is, I think that the truth is somewhere in the middle. Whitey, probably part of him did feel that, hey, I want to help the cause that's going on over there. But, you know, he's a gangster. Whitey Bulger's a gangster. He's in it to make money. That's the bottom line. And according to Pat Nee, for a long time, the Boston Irish mob, they were sending weapons over to Ireland to help the IRA. And according to him, one of the things they would do is a lot of Irish-born immigrants, when they would come over here and they were living in Boston, when they died, they would want to be buried back in Ireland. So when they sent their bodies back, according to Nee, him and the guys would send a lot of weapons and they would smuggle them in the caskets and send them back. Yeah, that's according to Pat Nee.
Jeez.
Yeah, that's according to Pat Nee. So, you know, now we're going to get into the Valhalla, which was a ship that they were sending the biggest amount of weapons ever that they were going to send over to Ireland, according to Pat Nee. Okay. And this is where you get involved. You get a guy by the name of John McIntyre. Okay. Now, John McIntyre, Bill, was a guy from Boston. He was Irish American, and he's not a gangster. He's a fisherman. He's an ex-Marine. He's involved in this just because, to him, you know, he wants to help the people over there get their freedom. He wants one Ireland, free of British rule. This is what he wants. So he's not a gangster by any means, but he's involved in this. He's on the shipping vessel, sending the weapons over. And what happens, Bill, is, and they mentioned this in the movie Black Mass, if you remember. But what happens is the law enforcement officials in Britain had an informant in the IRA by the name of Sean O'Callaghan, and he ratted out the whole shipment that was coming over. So British authorities stopped the ship and they confiscated the weapons. And what happens is the British are outraged because here we got all these weapons coming from America, you know, to help the IRA. And here they are, you know, which to me, it's like the height of hypocrisy. I mean, they started this mess and now they're crying and complaining about it, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So what happens is they're trying to put a lot of pressure on America to find out what the hell happened here. So in the meantime, you know, our law enforcement people in America are trying to figure out what the heck happened and how these weapons came out of Boston. And what happens is McIntyre gets picked up on a separate charge. And I think it was as I don't know, drug possession or something. He got picked up for something. There might have even been a DUI, Bill. It was a small charge. He got picked up. And remember, he's not a gangster. So when he gets taken in, they know that he's involved somehow in this Valhalla. And they're putting pressure on him. And he cracks pretty quickly. And he starts giving up the whole operation because he don't want to go to jail. I mean, he's like I said, he's not a gangster. So he gives up the operation and he names Whitey Bulger. Okay. So now here's where it gets really tricky, because according to what came out in the court proceedings, they said that the judge said that it was pretty, I forget the exact words he used, but he said that it was, he put the blame on John Conley for tipping Whitey Bulger, because what happens is Bulger gets tipped that McIntyre is naming him to the law enforcement. Okay. So you know what happens next. McIntyre disappears.
Mm-hmm.
And according to Pat Nee and according to one of Whitey's other guys, Kevin Weeks, I mean, Whitey and Stephen, the rifleman Fleming, they kidnapped McIntyre and they tortured the kid, Bill. You know, they ripped his teeth out with a pair of pliers. I mean, they wanted to find out. Yeah, I mean, they tortured the kid. They wanted to find out what he said. And then eventually they shot him in the back of the head with a shotgun, and they buried him in the house originally in the basement. And then they eventually moved them and they buried him in what would be the mob graveyard that they would find. And they found his body like 20 years later, you know, but again, this is the ruthlessness of Whitey Bulger. I mean, he's a gangster, Bill. And, you know, it's a shame because this kid got involved, you know, he was in it. He wanted to help the people over in Ireland that he you know, it wasn't free, and he wanted to give them their freedom. Mm-hmm. And he ends up getting tortured and killed.
Yeah.
And again, it goes, Bill, to the corruption of the FBI, because, I always felt that it didn't end with just John Conley, and John Morris was the other agent in charge that was involved helping Bulger. I always felt that there's no way that operation could have just ended at those two guys. This was going on too long. There was too much at stake, and it had to go higher than that, but Conley never talked, and Bulger never talked. So we never found out how high up it did go,
When you say it went high up, where do you think it went?
Well, here's the thing, Bill. I think it might have went all the way up to the top of the FBI, because, and I don't know, we'll never know, because, Whitey's dead and Conley's not talking. Unless Conley decides to talk, he's in prison.
Right.
But to me, Bill, it's like let's put it this way. Let's look into one of the murders that Whitey's was accused of. Another one was Roger Wheeler. Roger Wheeler was a billionaire businessman in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Okay. Now, he was very powerful, Bill. He had ex-Secret Service guys as his bodyguards. He was, very, very rich. And what happens is he bought a company called World Highlight. Okay. And they were like a legal gaming company all over the world. And the Winter Hill gang was skimming out of that. They had a accountant by the name of John Callahan that was working high up in the organization, and they were skimming money. And Wheeler did an investigation. He found out about that. And what happened is, Winter Hill gang put a hit on him, and they shot him right in his country club, Bill, when he was walking on. They showed that in the movie Black Mass. Remember when you had the kids were swimming and everything, and then one of Bulger's hitmans by the name of Johnny Mortarano walked up to Wheeler and shot him. And another guy, Joe McDonald, was the driver, driving the getaway car, and they took off. But this was in Oklahoma, and it was investigator in Oklahoma by the name of Mike Huff, who did a great job investigating this. And he realized that all of this traces back to Boston. He was a seasoned investigator, and he realized that this is what was happening. It was definitely leading to Whitey Bulger. So he went down that road investigating it. And at every turn, he had the FBI blocking him. And it wasn't just Conley and Morris. It was coming from high up at the FBI. They were blocking everything he tried to do. And he never was able to make a case, Bill. So to me, it had to be higher than Conley and Morris.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Because
it does. Because he went as high up as he possibly could to try to say, hey, I'm trying to get to the bottom of this murder case, and I'm getting blocked at every way
turn
possible. Yeah, every turn.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's amazing, the corruption, Bill, but the whole thing is just, and you have this situation with this kid McIntyre, who just, he ends up getting tortured over this. But, you got any questions, buddy?
No, I think you did a really good job covering that, Sean. I don't know if you have anything else you want to.
Well, we'll get more into it, Bill. We're going to have some guests on. We're going to talk more about, the 6 counties in Northern Ireland. We'll get into more of that. But to me, Bill, the bottom line is Britain caused this problem.
Mm-hmm.
Colonialism caused this problem. Colonialism splits communities, and it causes all these issues. So, Britain's got to fix it. They created it. Now fix the problem, and to me, that's the issue. But you see where the anger, where it wasn't just gangsters in America that were helping, it was just, anybody who was Irish American just wanted to help the cause over there of freedom for the people. People were getting killed over there, and there was a lot of people in America that were just disgusted with it.
Yeah.
And the one thing I want to add, Bill, I want to go sideways here for 1 second. One interesting thing that comes up in a lot of the books, it came up in T.J. English's book, and it came up into Pat Nee mentioned it too, is that there was a guy that was in prison who was kind of affiliated with Winter Hill, but not a member. and I believe his name was Wilson. And when he was in prison, he did time with a couple of the guys that were in the Westies in New York, in Hell's Kitchen.
Right. We've talked about them before.
Right. We mentioned them. They were crazy. The Gambinos hired them to do hits.
Right.
And anyway, according to TJ English and Pat Nee, Jimmy Coonan of the Westies did reach out to Whitey Bulger in Boston, and they wanted to have some type of alliance. And could you just imagine? Can you imagine though the shockwaves that would have sent through the underworld? I mean, to have, you know, the Westies. I mean, we talked about how, you know, the Gambinos had to tell them to calm down.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
and then, you know, to have them aligned with Bulger, you would also align someone else we talked about, Roy DeMeo, who was real close to the Westies, who was one of the most feared men in the underworld as well. Mm-hmm. So can you imagine that alliance? And here's what happened. According to Nee and TJ English, they said that Bulger thought about it, and then he said, no, I'm not going to meet with Coonan. He said, those guys are crazy. So here you have one of the most infamous gangsters in U.S. history. And he says, you know, I don't want to meet them guys. They're nuts.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, though, it's almost like the Winter Hill Gang is what the Westies would have been if the Gambinos weren't there to sort of pull in the reins. I mean, the
sure
Hill Gang was as murderous as any gang in, you know, in
they were
country.
They were. But I think the level of the level of violence though of the Westies was just a different level. You know what I mean? The way they were just chopping bodies up, and
right,
you know, them and DeMeo was just unbelievable. But you're right. I mean, Winter Hill. I mean, but the thing is, the Winter Hill Gang, I think, was more powerful as far as, you know, making more money than the Westies.
Right, because they didn't have that, you know, that other presence, that other mafia presence anywhere. I mean, the closest real
Rhode Island
power was you know, Providence, and they, you know, there was enough territory between them that they didn't have to, you know, they didn't have to cross paths that often.
Right. And Patriarca was a really smart boss in Rhode Island. And he's one that kind of flew under the radar, Bill. Like, you don't hear a lot about Patriarca, but he was kind of like in the mold of like Russell Buffalino, like really smart gangster that stayed in the shadows and really had a lot of control. And he had a friendship and a partnership with Whitey Bulger going way back to the 60s. And he realized, another guy that realized, you know, it's better off for me to be aligned with Whitey than to be at war with him. Yeah. Right. And even when Bulger goes to war later with the Angulos in Boston's North End, Angulo was the underboss. You know, it's interesting that Patriarca kind of stayed on the sidelines in that. And I always felt like, and this is just my opinion, but I felt like, you know, Patriarca was kind of siding with Bulger in that, because the Angulos kind of bought their way into the mob. You know what I mean? Like they kind of paid their way, and they didn't pay their dues. And a lot of people were angered by that. And I think Patriarca might have realized he made a mistake. And when that whole thing went down, it was interesting that, you know, the FBI investigation with Conley and all them never reached to Patriarca, you know? So that was always interesting. Like, because I think, you know, Bulger realized too that, you know, it's better for him to be aligned with Patriarca than be at war with him. You know, because these guys are cagey guys, Bill. But there's a difference, Bill. I think the important thing to realize is there's a difference between a gangster and a revolutionary.
Right.
Revolutionaries fighting for freedom, where a gangster, you know, the bottom line is, you know, they want to make money. Now, a lot of these guys like Pat Nee, part of him probably was a revolutionary. You know, he really wanted to help the cause over there. But, you know, other guys like Bulger, I mean, he's a gangster. And that's why I said a million times on the show, you know, don't say a businessman, like when they talk about old man Kennedy and the ruthless businessman and stuff. It's not a gangster. A gangster's a gangster.
Right.
You know, and you see what they did to this kid McIntyre. I mean, they didn't care that he wasn't a gangster. You know, he informed on him, and, you know, they ripped his teeth out with a pair of pliers. I mean, it's vicious as could be, you know, and that's the way these guys are, Bill. A gangster, his sole purpose is making money.
Yeah.
And anything that gets in the way of that is going to get steamrolled.
Yep.
You know? And that's the bottom line, buddy.
Because Sean said so.
Yeah. But yeah, this is a subject I want to get back to though, Bill. We're going to have some guests on and we'll get more into, more of the situation there. We'll talk about Bloody Sunday and we'll talk about Michael Collins and
yeah.
I want to get more in depth on that and talk about how they got to the situation there, and split the country in two. But, it's just the bottom line, the root of the problem to me is colonialism. That's the root of the problem.
Yeah.
Just like it's the root of the problem in Palestine, it's the root of the problem in Africa. I mean, it always comes down to colonialism, imperialism. When you take away a person's freedom, Bill, don't be surprised when they fight back, buddy.
Right. Yep.
So I think what do you think? We angered I'm sure the British ain't happy with me, but
well, you better. I would get maybe hire a food taster and make sure that somebody starts your car for you.
Yeah, well,
Apollonia.
I'd be more worried about the CIA than the British, buddy. But hey, is what it is, buddy. Sometimes telling the truth, buddy, can be a little dangerous.
Well, that's what we do.
We try to do.
That's what we do. We bring the truth. And we have a lot of really, really great topics, I think, that people are going to be interested. I mean, this was a great one here today, but I think, going forward, the rest of this year and into 2023, we're going to have some great topics. I mean, we're going to talk about Watergate. We'll probably do a 2 or 3 part, a series on Watergate. We're going to do more mafia figures. I don't know, Sean, all kinds of other stuff, right? What other topics we have lined up?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I want to get into Charles Manson and its connection to the CIA. That'll be interesting. But like you said, Watergate, mafia figures. I want to do Sam Giancana. Maybe we'll do Jimmy Hoffa disappearance. The Gambino family would be another. And just, there's just so much we could do. Roy DeMeo is one, we talked about him a lot on the show. I think, we really should do a show on him to go in depth to see, how vicious he really was. And then, we'll do more on the situation in Northern Ireland. We'll get some guests on.
Yeah.
I'd like to get Lisa Peace back on to talk about the RFK assassination.
Oh, definitely.
And the work she's doing for Sirhan with his parole. And then also down the road, I'd like to talk about Martin Luther King. Lisa could probably discuss that. Malcolm X, and lots of topics, buddy. We got lots of topics in the pipeline.
Yeah. Plus more pop culture stuff. We'll do more movies. I think we'll do a Star Wars episode pretty soon. We're going to do some different movies and probably some music too. I think we definitely have some music stuff we want to talk about. So, a lot of cool things coming up. All right, Sean.
All right, buddy.
Episode. And if you want to give us some feedback, reach out to us. You can email us at that's enough out of you show at gmail.com. We're on Facebook, and for now we're on Twitter. At least for now, we'll see where that goes. Instagram.
Yeah.
And then don't forget our YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, make sure you go out there and subscribe. You'll get the episodes a day early. And we appreciate the like and subscribe and however you guys can rate review our episodes and our show. We really appreciate it. All right, Sean.
All right, buddy.
That's enough out of you.
Good night, everybody.